"Why are you staring like that?" Mr. Grant said, standing over me while the whole class watched in uncomfortable silence. I whispered, "I'm just thinking." But my hand shook so much I worried the paper would rip under my fingers. He leaned closer and said, thinking, "You're useless at this," throwing the words like stones against my already fragile confidence. Laughter rose behind me and Liam muttered, "Ignore him," even though he sounded like he wanted to punch the wall. I said, "Don't. He'll just make everything worse." Praying no one saw how my throat tightened when they giggled at me. Maya turned slightly and whispered, "Are you okay?" Her voice soft enough that it broke whatever strength I had left. I answered, "Yeah," though the word cracked like thin glass sliding across my tongue, begging someone to notice my bones. Maya said, "You don't deserve that." But her pity felt sharper than anything Mr. Grant ever threw at me before. When the bell rang, Liam grabbed my backpack and said, "Let's just get out of here," trying to steady me. I nodded, saying I'm fine, even though my chest felt like it carried every cruel word ever spoken over me. Outside, he said, "Say the word and I'll report him." But I whispered, "No, they won't listen. Settle." He frowned and said, "I'm listening," giving me a look that pressed against the wall I kept around myself daily. I whispered, "Then why does it still feel like he's right?" My steps dragging on the sidewalk under crushing doubt. He said, "Because he's loud, not honest," pushing his shoulder against mine, like he needed me to believe him now. "At home?" Dad asked. "School okay?" Without looking up from bills scattered across the table, barely noticing my stiff smile, I answered, "Yeah," because saying anything else would have forced the truth out of me too fast to control properly. He nodded, saying, "Good," never seeing the way I curled my fingers tight just to keep breathing straight through tonight. In my room, I shut the door and whispered, "I'm fine," though the echo sounded nothing like strength inside me. I stared at the blank page on my desk, telling myself to write anything before my fear won again tonight. I said, "Just try," but the word useless slammed back into my chest harder than any insult should ever hit. I pressed my palms to my ears and muttered, "Stop," knowing it was only his voice living inside my head. Tears hit the page and I whispered, "Why can't I be better?" hoping the question didn't make me weaker tonight. My phone buzzed. Liam texting, "You okay?" Then I'm here, sending another message when I stayed silent too long alone. I typed, "I'm fine," but the lie felt heavier than anything else I carried today and my chest tightly bound. Maya wrote, "Don't believe him," and I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred from holding everything inside alone. I whispered, "Everyone keeps saying that, but none of their voices reach the part of me he damaged the most." The memory replayed again, his smirk, his glare, his words pounding through me like a hammer hitting thin glass hard. I said, "I'm trying," though doubt wrapped tight around my ribs each time I thought about speaking up tomorrow morning. I breathed, "Maybe I'll feel stronger," but the hope felt small compared to his voice echoing across my memory tonight. Still, I whispered, "I'll keep going," because quitting would prove him right, and I refused to let that happen tonight. "Why do you keep looking down, kid?" Mr. Grant said as he slammed my notebook on the desk. I said, "I'm checking my work," but he snorted like the sound disgusted him. "Checking," he said. "Your handwriting looks like ants fighting," I whispered. "I can rewrite it, even though my fingers were already trembling." He said, "Rewrite your whole brain while you're at it." Liam muttered, "He needs to chill," but I shook my head. I said, "Don't start anything," though my voice cracked so badly I hoped no one heard it. Mr. Grant smirked and said, "There it is again, weak." I felt my stomach twist, but I said nothing. He walked away, whispering to another teacher, and I caught "hopeless kid." Liam tapped my shoulder and said, "You good?" I answered no, but it doesn't matter, and tried to smile anyway. He said, "It matters to me," but his voice couldn't erase the damage already carved into me. Later, when he handed back graded worksheets, mine had a giant red D with the note, "Try thinking next time," I whispered. But I followed the instructions and he said, "Then the instructions were too hard for you." My chest burned. But I said okay, even though it felt like swallowing broken glass. At lunch, Maya asked, "Did he grade you unfairly again?" I said, "It's fine," and she whispered, "No, it isn't," answered. "I don't want trouble, but trouble always seemed to find me anyway." When class ended that day, he held me back, saying, "You're falling behind because you don't try." I said, "I do try," and he replied, "Not hard enough to matter." I felt my eyes sting, and he said, "See?" Always emotional, I asked, "Why do you hate me?" But he said, "Don't blame me for your weaknesses." Walking home, Liam said we need to tell someone, but I shook my head. I told him nobody will believe me, and he said, "I do." I whispered thanks, but the fear inside me didn't move. At home, Dad asked, "How were your grades?" Without looking away from the bills, I said, "Pretty good," and folded the D-grade sheet deeper into my backpack. Dad said, "Keep it up," but he didn't notice how my shoulders dropped. Later in my room, I whispered, "Why can't he leave me alone?" Liam texted, "You're strong," but I wrote back, "Not strong enough." He replied, "You're trying, and that counts." But I stared at the screen and felt nothing but pressure crushing my lungs. I whispered, "Trying isn't working," though saying it out loud made the room feel heavier. My phone buzzed again with Liam saying, "I'm here any time," but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I sat on my bed and said, "It's just 1 year," even though I didn't believe it. The truth slipped out when I whispered, "He won't stop," my breath shaking in the quiet. Every insult he threw at me stuck like a stain, and every day I said, "Maybe today will be different," though I never meant it. In class the next morning, he dropped my quiz on my desk and said, "Barely passing." Again. I said, "I worked hard," but he replied, "Some people work hard and still fail." My hands shook, and he leaned in to say, "Get used to it," I whispered. "Why me?" But he only smiled like the question entertained him. When I walked out, Maya asked, "What did he do now?" And I said, "Same thing as always." "You don't deserve any of it," but I told her, "Deserving doesn't matter to him." On the walk home, Liam said, "We'll get through this," and I whispered, "I hope so," even though the fear sat in my chest like a stone refusing to move, reminding me that every day with Mr. Grant carved a scar inside me. I didn't touch it. I shouted when the model collapsed. Mr. Grant snapped, "You always ruin everything, don't you?" I said it wasn't me. Liam saw the whole thing. Liam stepped beside me and whispered, "He's lying." I saw. Mr. Grant barked, "Parents, look at this." "He can't take responsibility." A mother asked, "Did he really break it?" Like she already believed him. I said, "No, it fell when he moved the table." Shouted, "Stop blaming others. You're pathetic." My cheeks burned as everyone stared like I ruined the world. Liam said, "He didn't do anything." "You pushed it," Mr. Grant hissed. "Detention. And be grateful I don't fail you." I whispered, "Why are you doing this?" Even though I knew. He answered, "Because someone like you needs limits." I felt something snap inside me like a wire pulled too long. After the fair, Liam said, "Don't listen to him. He's scared of real talent." I said, "Then why does he always win?" Liam answered, "Because you let him." "Stop letting him." At home, Dad asked, "Rough day?" Without looking up from bills, I said, "It's fine," but my voice shook like thin paper. He said, "Good," and went back to circling numbers. In my room, I stared at the mirror and whispered, "Enough." Said, "I'm done letting him decide who I am." My reflection shook, but I kept talking to it like it could fight back. I said, "You're not useless. You're just scared. So start." I opened my books and whispered, "1 page tonight. Just 1. Mr. Grant's voice echoed, "You'll never be someone." I answered out loud, "Watch me." My hands trembled, but I kept reading sentence after sentence. Hours passed until my eyes burned and I whispered, "Tomorrow again." Each night I repeated, "Don't quit," even when my chest ached badly. Liam noticed and asked, "You studying now?" Raising a brow, I said, "I have to. I won't stay the same." He grinned and said, "Good. Prove him wrong." I muttered, "I'm proving myself." And the words felt new. Every day I carried his insults, but they started losing weight. In class he said, "Stop pretending you can learn," but I didn't break. I answered, "Maybe I'm learning anyway." He glared, "You're getting cocky," but his voice shook faintly. I whispered, "Maybe I'm just tired of losing." At home, Dad asked, "Studying hard?" Sounding almost curious. I said, trying, hoping he didn't hear the fear underneath. He said, "Keep going," and for once it felt like support. In my room I whispered, "Maybe I can change," touching the mirror. I said, "I'm not weak. Not anymore." But fear still asked, "What if you fail?" I answered, "Then I'll try again." Night after night I studied until my spine ached. I kept whispering, "Don't stop now," when exhaustion hit hardest. Liam asked, "Why push so hard?" Watching me rewrite messy notes. I said, "Because I refuse to stay who he thinks I am," he said. "Then become someone he can't touch." I whispered, "I will," even though fear curled in my stomach. Every insult he threw circled my mind, but now they pushed me. I said, "I'm going to rise whether he believes it or not." Looking at my notebook, I whispered, "This is where I start." I felt the shift inside me, like something waking up slowly. I said, "I won't be the kid he broke." I whispered, "I'll become someone stronger." And for the first time, the future whispered back, "Try." I'm ready, even if I wasn't sure yet. I promise. High school felt like a battlefield the moment I stepped into it. Liam said, "You ready for this?" And I told him, "I have to be." I felt something burning in me, pushing me to keep moving, even when fear tried to drag me back, toward my old self again. Liam kept saying, "You're different now," and I answered, "I'm trying." Teachers asked questions, and I forced myself to raise my hand even when my voice shook. Every small step felt like climbing out of a hole I'd lived in too long. But I refused to fall back into silence. Late nights became normal. I sat at my desk whispering, "You can do this," while pages piled around me. Liam called often, saying, "Don't burn out," and I told him, "I need this." Each hour I studied felt like another blow against the voice Mr. Grant left inside me still. My first day came back during math. When I saw the grade, I whispered, "No way," and Liam shouted, "Finally." My eyes burned too fast to hide it. Maya walked past saying, "You worked for it." Hearing that made something inside me steady. It's like I owned a part of me. Later that month, the school hosted a college prep event. I wandered around until a calm voice said, "You look curious." I turned and met Professor Hale. He asked, "What drives you?" I said, "I want to prove something." He nodded slowly and replied, "Good. Pressure makes diamonds, not excuses." After the event, he pulled me aside and asked, "Who told you you weren't enough?" I froze. I said, "No one important." He frowned and said, "Someone tried to shrink you. Don't let them win." His words felt strange, almost unbelievable, but they settled into me like seeds waiting. Liam asked later, "What did he say?" And I answered things I didn't know I needed. He laughed and said, "Told you you're not hopeless." I nudged him and muttered, "Shut up." But hearing someone believe in me felt unreal. It made every late night feel worth the shaking and doubt. Study groups became part of my routine. I'd whisper, "Can someone explain this?" And students actually helped me. One girl said, "You pick things up fast," and I almost laughed. I thought, maybe I'm not who he said I was. The idea scared me, but it also felt strangely possible. One afternoon, Professor Hale stopped me in the hall and said, "You look determined," I answered. "I'm trying to be." He smiled and said, "Trying becomes becoming." His confidence in me felt unreal. I said, "Why do you care?" And he replied, "Because potential deserves someone who sees it clearly." Walking home, I kept repeating his words. Liam said on the phone, "Dude, you're glowing." I snorted and replied, "Shut up." He said, "No, really, you sound alive." I didn't want to admit it, but he was right. For once, the future felt like something I could reach at last. The more I worked, the more I felt something rebuilding inside me. Maya caught me studying one day and said, "You've changed." I replied, "I'm trying to grow." She nodded and whispered, "I'm glad." Her kindness made me stand taller. Every small moment stitched another piece of strength back into. When grades came out again, Professor Hale looked at my paper and said, "Impressive," I said. "I'm getting there," he replied. "You're already moving." His voice carried something I'd never heard from a teacher. I felt heat in my chest and whispered, "Thank you," finally believing maybe I could rise. Before he left for the day, he said, "The ones who rise the highest are usually the ones someone tried to bury." I stood there holding those words like armor. Liam texted, "You're becoming dangerous," and I answered, "Good." For the first time, I felt ready to fight forward today. I held the envelope in my hands like it might burn me. Dad asked, "What's that?" And I said, "I think it's the answer I've been waiting for." My voice shook so much I almost laughed at myself. He said, "Open it," and I whispered, "Okay." Even though my heart felt like it was pounding against my ribs, I tore the top and said, "Please let this be real," when I read the words. "We are pleased to inform you," my knees almost buckled. Dad grabbed my shoulders and asked, "Did you get in?" I nodded and said, "I got in. Dad, I really got in." He pulled me into a hug tighter than anything he'd given me in years. "I'm proud of you," he said, and hearing those words after so long made my chest shake. I told him I didn't think I'd ever hear you say that. He answered, "You earned it." What? When Liam heard the news, he yelled, "Finally, I knew you'd make it," and dragged me out of the house, saying we needed to celebrate properly. I laughed, saying, "Calm down," but he shook his head and shouted, "No way. This is huge." At the diner, he kept telling the waiter, "My guy here is going to a top school." I said, "Stop embarrassing me," but I couldn't stop smiling. When Maya showed up, she asked, "Is it true?" And I said, "Yeah, I made it." Now, her eyes watered and she whispered, "I'm really happy for you." I said, "Thanks," trying not to choke up. Liam leaned in and said, "You earned every bit of this." I answered, "Maybe," but inside a voice whispered something colder. I wanted Mr. Grant to hear the news. I wanted him to realize the boy he tried to crush survived. Later that night, Dad knocked and said, "You okay?" I answered, "Yeah, just thinking." He sat on the edge of my bed and said, "You worked hard for this. I know I haven't always been there, but I'm proud." I whispered, "Thank you." Hearing him say that again felt unreal, like someone handing me a new beginning I never expected when he left. I held the acceptance letter and whispered, "I did it." The victory felt strange, almost unfinished. I caught myself picturing Mr. Grant's face when he learned where I was going. I imagined him blinking in disbelief, maybe even feeling small for once. I said, "You don't get to own my future anymore," letting the words settle. The next morning, Liam ran up to me and said, "So when do you leave?" I said, "Orientation's next week." He grinned and said, "You're seriously doing this?" I nodded. Maya walked over and said, "We'll miss you." I replied, "I'll miss you guys too." Liam said, "Send pictures. And don't act all important when you become famous." Oh, I laughed and told him, "I'm not going to be famous." He said, "You never know." Maya added, "Just don't forget us." I said, "I couldn't if I tried." When I finally stood at the gates of the university a week later, I whispered, "This is it." My chest filled with fear, hope, and the quiet hunger for something like closure. I stepped forward and said, "Don't freak out now," even though my hands trembled. Students hurried around me, laughing and talking like they belonged here already. I whispered, "I'll make this place mine," letting the promise steady my breathing. As I walked through the entrance, I felt the old fear fade, replaced by the belief that I finally had a chance. Asterisk. "I can't believe this is really happening," I muttered as I stepped through the university gate on my first day. Liam laughed over the phone and said, "You're finally here." "Try to breathe, man," I said. "I'm breathing, but my hands are shaking. That's normal." "Go meet people. Don't hide like you did in high school," he said. I rolled my eyes and whispered, "One step at a time." I walked into orientation and heard students chatting around me, their excitement filling the air. A girl next to me said, "First year?" "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. She said, "I'm Jenna. If you get lost, tell me." "Thanks, but I'll try not to," I said, though I already knew I'd need help. We walked toward the main hall where the orientation sheets were posted. Jenna pointed and said, "Schedules are there." I nodded and moved closer. But my eyes caught another sheet beside it. New university staff. I almost walked past. But one name stabbed into my chest like a hook. "Grant Donovan, Assistant Administrative Staff." Jenna asked, "You okay?" I couldn't force the words out. "You look like you saw a ghost," she said. "Not a ghost," I whispered. Someone. From my past. Bad or good? She asked. Bad, I said, feeling my pulse hammering. Before she could ask more, I stepped back and called Liam. He answered, How's your first day? He's here, I said, voice thin. Who? Grant. Liam went silent, then said, You're joking. I'm not. His name's on the board. What's he doing there? Assistant administrative staff, I said, still trying to breathe. So he got. Liam paused. Dropped, demoted, whatever. Karma's starting, man. I don't know how to feel, I said, staring at the name until my eyes ached. Feel proud, Liam said. You made it, and he's... Here, I finished, my voice barely holding. Jenna walked back to me and asked, You sure you're all right? Yeah, I said. Just a lot to take in. She nodded and said, Orientation starts soon. Come sit with me. I followed her to the auditorium, but my mind kept circling the same truth. I was standing in the future I fought for. And he was here too, but not as the man who once towered over me. He was just another name on a list. I whispered, Maybe this is my chance to finally breathe. Orientation music started and Jenna nudged me, saying, You'll be fine, really. I managed a nod, though my pulse kept racing. Do you want water? She asked. No, I'm good, I said, forcing myself to focus on the stage. A speaker said, Welcome to your new start, and I felt the words settle under my skin like a promise. Liam texted, You've got this. I typed back, trying. Jenna leaned over and said, You'll like it here. Everyone's starting fresh. Fresh? I echoed, tasting the word like I was still deciding if it belonged to me. After orientation, we walked outside, and I saw the staff office from a distance. Jenna noticed my stare and asked, Is that where he works? Yeah. Do you want to see him? No, I said quickly. Not yet. She nodded and said, Whenever you're ready. I walked a few steps closer anyway, my curiosity pulling me forward. I whispered, Does he even remember me? Liam texted, He will. He has to. I stared at the office door and murmured, I'm not the kid he broke. I'm here because I fought. And he's here because... Jenna asked, Because... I spotted him near the faculty office before I even understood what my feet were doing. He turned and his eyes widened like he had seen a ghost. He whispered, You made it here? I said, Yeah. My voice didn't shake this time. He stepped closer and said, I didn't expect. I cut in, I know you didn't. He looked down, rubbing his hands like he needed a script. I asked, What are you doing here? He said, Working. Helping with paperwork. The words sounded heavy in his mouth, almost embarrassed. I said, So you're not teaching anymore? He froze before whispering, Not exactly. I felt old wounds scrape open, but I didn't let them bleed. I said, You always told me I'd never get far, he whispered. I was wrong. The hallway went quiet like even the walls wanted to listen. I said, I don't need your apology. His breath shook as he asked, Can we talk? I answered, No, not today. I walked past him, and I heard him whisper my name like a plea. I kept walking. Behind me, students whispered, What happened? Someone said, He looked terrified. Others said, Who is that guy? I didn't answer anyone. Liam ran up to me and said, You okay? I nodded and said, Yeah, I just saw him. Liam hissed, seriously. He works here? I said, Apparently. Liam muttered, He deserves worse. I said I don't care about him anymore. But the truth sat heavy in my chest. Liam asked, Then why do you look like you can't breathe? I said, Because facing him felt like walking into my past. Liam said, And you survived it. I whispered, barely. Later that day, I saw him again near the stairs. He said, Please, just hear me out. I said, No. He reached for my arm, then stopped like he remembered he had no right. He said, I wasn't in a good place back then. I answered, That wasn't my fault.
Ollie?
He said, I know. I was terrible to you. I said you broke a kid who trusted you. He whispered, I regret it every day. For a moment his voice sounded like a man drowning. I said, I'm not here to save you. He nodded, like the words hit deeper than any insult. Students nearby slowed down, staring like they sensed something breaking. I turned away. He called softly, "I'm sorry." I didn't look back. Liam asked later, "Did he say anything useful?" I said, "Just excuses." Liam said, "Then forget him." I whispered, "I wish I could." But deep down, I felt the shift inside me. I said, "I'm not afraid of him anymore." And for the first time, the words felt true. When I got back to my dorm, I sat on the edge of my bed shaking from everything that happened. Liam called and said, "Do you want me to come over?" I said, "No, I just need to think." He replied, "Don't let that man take your peace again." I whispered, "I'm trying." But seeing him felt like stepping into a nightmare I outgrew. He said, "Then remind yourself you're not that scared kid anymore," I said. "I saw fear in his eyes, Liam," Liam replied. "Good. Let him feel it after everything he did," I whispered. "I don't want revenge as much as I want freedom," he said, "then walk past him every time." "That hurts more." I leaned back and said, "He kept looking at me like he expected forgiveness," Liam said. "Forgiveness is earned, not taken," I muttered. "Maybe one day I'll let go, but today isn't that day," he asked. "So what will you do when you see him again?" I said, "I'll keep walking. He can live with the weight he created." Liam replied, "That's strength. That's the part he never expected to see." I whispered, "That's enough." I exhaled. I heard two students whispering near the library door. One said, "Did you hear about that new staff guy?" The other replied, "The one who used to be a teacher?" Someone said he got fired. I pretended not to listen, but my chest tightened. Liam nudged me and said, "They're talking about him, aren't they?" I answered, "Yeah, seems like everyone is." He said, "You're not spreading anything, right?" I shook my head. "No, I don't need to." When I walked into the research wing, Professor Hale waved me over. "Ready for another long session?" I smiled. "I'm ready." "It feels good to be here," he said. "You're sharp. You pick things up fast. Keep this pace and you'll pass half the seniors." Hearing that made something warm rise in me. "Thanks, I'm trying." Professor Hale lowered his voice. "I heard a rumor about an employee. A disgraced teacher. Strange coincidence." "I know him," he asked. "Bad history." "Yes," I said. "Very." He nodded. "Then let the past drag itself. You move forward." I breathed out slowly. "I'm doing my best." Later, on my way out, I saw Mr. Grant pushing a cart stacked with boxes. He muttered, "Move, please, just move," trying to shove it through a narrow hallway. A younger staff member said, "You're slow again." "We needed that delivered an hour ago," he replied. "I'm going as fast as I can." The other guy snapped, "Try harder." I felt the words hit me the same way his had hit me years ago. He looked up, saw me, and froze for a second. I said quietly, "You should let them pass." He moved aside without speaking. Outside, Liam asked, "Did he say anything?" I answered, "Nothing. He couldn't." Liam laughed bitterly. "He used to act like he ruled the whole school. Now he can't even rule a hallway." I shrugged. "Life catches up." At lunch, a group of students at the next table whispered loudly. One said, "My roommate's cousin said he got reported for screaming at kids." Another added, "I heard he manipulated grades." Third said, "Imagine losing your license like that." Liam looked at me and whispered, "You okay hearing all this?" I said, "Strangely, yeah." When I headed to the supply office to get materials for the lab, I saw him again. He was kneeling on the floor, sorting cables into boxes. He whispered to himself, "Why can't anything just stay organized?" I asked the clerk. "Can I grab the connectors?" She said, "Yeah, but step around him. He's been messing things up all morning." He winced at that as I reached for the box. He said softly, "You shouldn't be here," I replied. "This is where my work is," he said. "Not what I meant," I asked. "Then what did you mean?" He swallowed hard. "Nothing." Outside, I took a breath. Liam caught up to me and said, "You look shaken." I forced a smile. "Seeing him like that, I don't know what I feel," Liam said. "It's karma." "Plain and simple," I answered. Maybe, but it feels heavier than that. In the evening, Professor Hale checked on me. "You're quieter today," he said. I replied, "I saw him struggling again." He asked, "Do you pity him?" I hesitated. "I don't know," Professor Hale said. "Pity shouldn't guide you. Growth should." I said, "Then I'll focus on that." Walking back to my dorm, I saw Mr. Grant outside, lifting a box into the back of a truck. He slipped. The box hit the ground. He whispered, "Not again, please." The desperation in his voice made my stomach twist. He didn't see me. I turned away before he could. When I reached my room, Liam called. "You good?" I answered, "I'm better than I thought I'd be." He asked, "Because he's falling?" I said, "No, because I'm not." And for the first time, I fully believed it. Mr. Grant stopped me behind the library, his hands shaking around the folders he carried. He said, "I need to talk to you," like the words tasted bitter. I answered, "Why now?" Because my chest felt tight the moment he opened his mouth. He said I was wrong back then, but his voice kept breaking like cheap paper. I told him, "You don't get to rewrite what you did," refusing to look away. He said, "I hurt you," and his fingers tightened around the folders until they bent. I said, "You didn't just hurt me. You shaped every fear I carried, letting the truth finally rise." He whispered, "I shouldn't have taken my anger out on you," sounding smaller with every word. I replied, "That was your choice, because excuses never healed wounds, they only reopened them." He said, "I lost everything after that year, but I felt no sympathy rise inside me." I asked, "And you want what from me now?" Even though I already knew his answer, he said forgiveness, barely breathing the word like it might fall apart before reaching me. I laughed once, not from humor, but from the shock of hearing him ask for something he never gave. He said, "I know I failed you, but his guilt didn't move the weight inside my ribs." I told him, "You broke a kid who trusted you, because I needed him to hear it aloud." He nodded and said, "I can't fix the past," but his eyes begged me to try anyway. I answered, "I'm not the boy you broke, and I'm not here to rescue you," he whispered. "Then what happens now?" Staring at me like he expected punishment. I said nothing happens because some endings don't need noise. They just need distance to settle everything. He asked, "So you won't forgive me?" Letting fear crack through his voice. I said, "Forgiveness isn't something you demand," watching his face drain like he finally understood his place. He whispered, "I'm sorry," but the words felt too light to cover the damage he left behind. I answered, "You needed to say that for you, not for me," realizing I didn't feel anger anymore. He asked, "Will you at least talk to me again?" Like talking could rebuild what he destroyed. I said no, because closure doesn't require connection. Sometimes it just requires walking away. He said, "I really am sorry, but I didn't let the words stick to me anymore." I replied, "Your regret came years too late," finally breathing without his voice pressing on my spine. He whispered, "I hope your life is better now," sounding defeated in a way I'd never seen. I said, "It is because letting go of him felt like lifting a weight I carried for too long." He asked, "So this is the end?" Though the answer was obvious the moment he approached me, I said yes, and the word felt clean, sharp, and final in a way I needed. He looked at the ground and whispered, "Thank you for listening, though I hadn't given him anything else." I answered, "Goodbye," then stepped away, letting the space between us finally become something permanent. He didn't follow, and I felt the air shift around me like I had walked out of a long, dark hallway. I whispered to myself, "This is freedom," because for the first time, his shadow didn't stretch across my future anymore. I walked away slowly, breathing steady, knowing I had taken back every part of me he tried to break. And nothing he said could change that now. Finally.
I walked across campus thinking about how far I had come. Liam said, "You look lighter today," and I felt he was right. I answered, "Maybe I finally believe I deserve to be here." He laughed and said, "You earned every bit of this place." I told him, "It still feels unreal most days, but I'm trying." He nudged me and said, "Stop trying and just accept it." I laughed because his confidence in me always pushed me forward. Later that afternoon I walked alone, enjoying the cool quiet air. A student waved and said, "Congrats on the research award," by the way. I thanked them, surprised I could sound confident without forcing anything. For once I felt like I wasn't pretending to be someone stronger. When I reached the courtyard I saw a supply cart rolling slowly. At first I didn't look twice, but then I heard his voice. He said, "Excuse me," like he didn't expect anyone to notice him anymore. I turned, and my heart went still when I recognized Mr. Grant. He paused and whispered, "I didn't know you studied here." I said, "I do," trying to sound steady even as memories rose sharply. He looked down and said, "I'm glad you made it, truly glad." I answered, "Thank you," because anger wasn't what lived in me anymore. He asked, "Do you have a minute?" sounding unsure, almost afraid to speak. I nodded and said, "Go ahead, because I wanted to finish this chapter." He said, "I was wrong back then," shifting like the words weighed heavily. I let him continue without saving him from the truth he carried now. He said, "I thought crushing you would fix my own failures, but it didn't." I breathed slowly and said, "I lived with those words for years." He whispered, "I'm sorry," like the apology was breaking him open from inside. I told him, "I'm not here to punish you, but I won't carry this anymore." He nodded and said, "You grew stronger than I ever was." I answered, "I just stopped letting your voice control my life." He looked shaken and said, "I hope you keep rising." I said, "I plan to," and stepped back into the sunlight warming me. Walking away, I felt something unbreak inside me for the first time. Later Liam asked, "Where'd you go?" and I told him everything honestly. He said, "So that's it," staring like he couldn't believe it ended quietly. I replied, "It had to, because fighting him again would only trap me backward." Liam nodded and said, "I'm proud of you for letting it go." I laughed softly and said, "Letting go feels heavier than holding on." He said, "Freedom works like that," giving me a look that pushed hope forward. I walked with him toward the library, feeling something building inside me. He asked, "What now?" like the future was already waiting ahead of us. I said, "Now I live, because no shadow from my past owned me anymore." When we reached the steps I felt the world open wider around me. I whispered, "I finally made it," letting the truth settle deep inside me. Liam grinned and said, "You earned more than just grades this semester." I answered, "I earned myself," surprising even me with how honest it sounded. As we walked inside I saw sunlight again on the glass behind me. I thought, he tried to bury me, feeling no bitterness left in my voice. I finished the thought quietly, saying, he didn't know I was a seed. I smiled as freedom finally settled inside me.